February 4th, 1945. 3:15 p.m. The coastal road to Livadia Palace, Yalta, Crimea, Soviet Union. The Black Sea hurls itself against the rocky cliffs below, sending plumes of freezing spray skyward that mix with the sharp, pine-scented wind whipping down from the Crimean hills. Winston Spencer Churchill, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, sits rigid in the back seat of the Humber staff car, his heavy greatcoat collar turned up, a fresh Romeo Yalta cigar clenched between his teeth. The engine's low growl competes with the rhythmic crash of waves. You can almost taste the salt on the air, feel the chills seeping through the glass as the palace comes into view. A pristine white neoclassical edifice with towering columns and wide terraces overlooking the sea, once the summer playground of Tsar Nicholas II, now scarred by war yet hastily restored for this moment of fragile Allied unity. The car crunches to a halt on the gravel forecourt. Soviet NKVD guards in greatcoats and fur hats stand at rigid attention, their breath visible in the cold. Churchill steps out heavily, cane in hand, the wind tugging at his sparse hair. He surveys the scene. Aides unloading crates of documents, maps, and cipher machines. The faint smell of fresh paint masking the lingering odor of cordite from recent fighting in the region. Stalin has already arrived by train from Moscow. Roosevelt is still steaming across the Atlantic aboard the USS Quincy, his frail body battered by the voyage. The big three are converging here, in this Black Sea resort town, to carve up the post-war world, while Nazi Germany still fights on its last legs. Inside Livadia Palace, the grand white hall has been repurposed as the main conference chamber. Marble floors gleam under enormous crystal chandeliers. Long baize-covered tables form a U-shape, chairs positioned with military precision. Heavy velvet curtains frame tall windows, offering glimpses of the restless sea. The air hangs thick with the aroma of strong Russian tobacco, polished wood, and the faint metallic temps of ink from freshly unrolled maps. Interpreter Oleg Troyanovsky for the Soviets, Charles Bolin for the Americans hover. Near the leaders, notebooks at the ready. British Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden, Field Marshal Sir Alan Brooke, and American counterparts like Secretary of State Edward Stettin and Admiral William Leahy fill the outer chairs, their faces etched with exhaustion from years of war. Churchill enters and extends a firm hand to Joseph Stalin, the Generalissimo already seated in his marshal's uniform, short, stocky, and inscrutable. His mustache neatly trimmed, eyes watchful beneath heavy brows. Generalissimo, Churchill rumbles, the words carrying his characteristic lisp. Stalin's handshake is iron-strong, his expression cordial yet opaque. "Prime Minister?" comes the reply through the interpreter, the Russian accent clipped and deliberate. Roosevelt arrives later that evening, wheeled in, his cape draped over his shoulders, managing a tired smile despite the pain in his legs and the shadow of illness. The first plenary session convenes promptly at 5 p.m. Stalin opens with military updates. The Red Army's massive winter offensive has already liberated Warsaw and is pushing toward the Oder River, 300 miles from Berlin. Churchill nods, acknowledging the Soviet sacrifices 20 million dead, but his mind is elsewhere. The real battle begins when Poland's future surfaces as the first agenda item. Stalin leans forward, his voice steady. For the Soviet government, the question of Poland is a question of honor. The Soviet Union has suffered greatly from invasions through Polish territory. We cannot tolerate a hostile Poland on our border. He insists on the Curzon line as the eastern frontier, essentially accepting the 19th partition, and demands compensation for Poland in the west at Germany's expense. The provisional government, he says, must be based on the Soviet-backed Lublin Committee, broadened on a more democratic basis to include some London exiles, with free elections promised later. Churchill's bulldog jaw sets. He pounds the table lightly for emphasis. Britain declared war on Germany because of Poland. We cannot accept a Poland that is merely a Soviet satellite. The London government in exile must have a voice. Free, unfettered elections, under international supervision that is the only guarantee of true independence. His words echo off the marble walls. Roosevelt mediates, ever the optimist, suggesting a commission to reorganize the government. Stalin listens, occasionally stroking his mustache, conceding little. The Curzon line is non-negotiable. the Lublin Poles will dominate. As interpreters scramble to keep pace, the room pulses with unspoken tension. You can almost feel Churchill's frustration, the weight of Poland's betrayal in 1939. The fear that the Red Army's occupation will become permanent control. Short sentences punctuate the debate. Honor demands it. Democracy requires it. Security above all. The session drags into the evening. A brief adjournment for tea and sandwiches, black bread, caviar, strong tea for the British delegation. Churchill lights another cigar on the terrace, gazing at the darkening sea. Eden joins him. He means to swallow them whole. Anthony, the bear's claws are already extended. Stalin's toasts later that night, lavish banquets of sturgeon, vodka, and creaming wine ring hollow. The Generalissimo raises his glass to the alliance, to victory, but his eyes betray calculation. Be nightfall as dispatches arrive confirming Soviet forces consolidating control over liberated territories. Churchill retires to his suite overlooking the Black Sea. The waves crash relentlessly below. He senses it now. The wartime brotherhood, cracking under the pressure of ambition. Stalin's promises of democracy feel as thin as the February mist rolling in from the water. But the negotiations have only just begun. What further demands will the Soviet leader press? And how far will the Western Allies bend before the alliance fractures entirely? February 6, 1945. 4:40 p.m. The same Whitehall in Levadia Palace. The winter sun has already dropped behind the Crimean ridges, leaving the room lit by the hard yellow glare of chandeliers and the blue haze of cigar and cigarette smoke that clings to every velvet drape and every uniform braid. The ashtrays overflow. Interpreters' voices rise and fall in a constant, low murmur of translation. Papers rustle. Pens scratch. The atmosphere is thick, almost suffocating, like breathing through wet wool. Churchill sits forward, elbows planted on the green baize, his heavy-lidded eyes fixed on Stalin across the table. Roosevelt, pale and drawn, occupies the head of the Usheba. In his wheelchair, a wool blanket tucked around his knees. He speaks softly, almost apologetically, trying to thread compromise through the widening cracks. They have moved from Poland's borders to its government. Stalin has just repeated his formula. The Lublin Poles must form the core. The London exiles can be invited in on equal terms only after the provisional government is recognized. No veto power for Mikulicik or any of the London group. Elections. Yes, when conditions permit. When the Red Army deems the rear secure. Churchill's voice cuts through the interpreter's relay like a bayonet. Mr. Stalin, we are being asked to hand over to what is, in effect, a Soviet creation, the sovereignty of an allied nation. Britain went to war for Poland's independence. If we accept this arrangement without ironclad guarantees, history will say we abandoned her twice. Stalin does not flinch. He leans back slightly, fingers steepled, and replies in measured tones. Poland will be free. But Russia has been invaded through Poland twice in 30 years. We will not permit a third. A friendly Poland is not a luxury, it is a necessity for the survival of the Soviet peoples. A long silence follows. You can almost hear the tick of the wall clock, the distant crash of surf through the tall windows. Roosevelt lifts a trembling hand. Gentlemen, perhaps we can agree on a declaration on liberated Europe. All liberated territories will hold free elections as soon as practicable. Allied representatives will assist in supervising them. Poland will be the first test case. Stalin's mustache twitches just the faintest suggestion of a smile. He nods once. Acceptable, provided the provisional government is consulted on the composition of any supervisory commission. Churchill exhales a long plume of smoke. A knows what consulted means in Stalin's lexicon. Veto. Yet the alternative is rupture here and now, with the Red Army already sitting on half of Europe. He glances at Eden, who gives the smallest shake of the head. Don't give ground on supervision. Churchill turns back. We insist on three-power supervision: American, British, Soviet in equal numbers. No veto. Observers from the Polish government in exile must also be present. That is the minimum condition on which His Majesty's government can agree. Stalin considers. His eyes flick toward Molotov, then back. Very well. We will accept tripartite supervision, in principle. Details to be worked out by the foreign ministers. The room exhales. A small, brittle victory. But everyone in the room understands the sleight of hand. In principle is not in practice. The Red Army controls the ground. The elections, whenever they come, will be held under Soviet bayonets. Later that evening, the Big Three adjourned to the Palace Estate dining room for another of Stalin's legendary banquets. Crystal glasses clink, toasts follow one another in rapid succession to the Grand Alliance. To the defeat of German fascism, to peace, everlasting. Each toast is answered with a swallow of icy vodka or sweet Crimean champagne. Stalin rises again and again, proposing healths to Churchill, the indomitable bulldog, to Roosevelt, the great architect of victory, even to the brave Polish people. His face remains impassive, but his eyes glitter. Churchill responds in kind, glass raised high. To Marshal Stalin, whose armies have torn the guts out of the German war machine. May our unity endure, as long as the common danger lasts. The phrase hangs in the air a fraction too long. Stalin's gaze sharpens for the briefest instant, then he smiles thin, plate and drinks. After midnight, Churchill walks the long marble corridor to his suite, cane tapping. Eden falls into step beside him. He gave us the declaration, Winston. On paper, we have safeguards. Churchill stops beneath a sconce. The light carves deep shadows across his face. On paper, Anthony. But paper burns, and Stalin has an army that does not. He will keep what he has taken. Poland will be the first domino, then Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia. Perhaps more. He turns toward the tow window. Beyond the glass, the Black Sea is invisible in the darkness, but its steady, relentless pounding can still be felt through the stone. I fear we have just presided over the birth certificate of a new tyranny, one that will stretch from the Baltic to the Adriatic, and we have signed it with our own hands. Eden says nothing. There is nothing to say. Churchill stubs out his cigar in a porcelain dish. We must finish here quickly. I need to get home. I need to speak before the truth is buried under victory parades and handshakes. He does not yet know the exact words he will use, or the place he will choose to say them, but the phrase is already forming somewhere deep in the marrow of his mind. An iron curtain. The conference will drag on for 3 more days. Germany will be divided into zones. Reparations will be debated. The United Nations will be sketched in broad strokes. But for Churchill, the decisive moment has already passed. The map of Europe is being redrawn in this palace by the Sianda. Half of it is slipping behind a barrier no treaty can breach. What he has seen here cannot be unseen, and soon the world will have to hear it. The last toast and the long goodbye. February 11th, 1945. 8:45 p.m. The grand banquet hall of Levadia Palace glows under a constellation of chandeliers. The long table groans under silver platters. Suckling pig glazed with honey, shashlik skewers still sizzling, bowls of black caviar mounded on ice, pyramids of blinis, and bottles of Soviet champagne sweating in silver buckets. The air is warm, heavy with roast meat, perfume, cigarette smoke, and the sharp bite of vodka. Churchill sits at Stalin's right, his dinner jacket slightly rumpled, a fresh cigar already lit. Roosevelt is at the head, looking ghostly pale beneath the lights, his smile fixed, but his hands trembling as he lifts a glass. Around them, swirlades, interpreters, generals, and diplomats' faces flushed from drink and the strange euphoria of nearing victory. Stalin stands the room, quiets instantly. He raises his glass, voice low but caring, to the armed forces of the 3 powers, to the soldiers, sailors, and airmen who have carried the burden of this war. May their courage live forever. The toast is answered with a roar and the clink of crystal. Churchill drinks deeply, the champagne cold against his teeth. Then he rises in turn broad-shouldered, chin jutting forward, to the Marshal of the Soviet Union. To the Red Army that has broken the back of the Nazi beast, and to the hope that our three nations, having fought side by side, will continue to walk together in peace. The words are warm. The subtext is colder. Stalin meets Churchill's gaze for a long moment. 10 nodes on say. Almost they drink again. Later, as the banquet winds down and the musicians strike up a slow waltz, Churchill steps onto the terrace with Eden and a few others. The night air is sharp, cutting through the haze of alcohol and cigar smoke. Below them, the Black Sea is a black mirror, reflecting only the scattered lights of Yalta town. Churchill leans on the balustrade, staring into the darkness. Eden speaks quietly. We got the Declaration on Liberated Europe. We got tripartite supervision. We got a promise of Polish elections. Churchill exhales a long plume of smoke that curls upward and vanishes. We got words. Anthony, Stalin has armies. Words do not march. Armies do. He turns, his face half in shadow. I watched him tonight. Every time he raised a glass to friendship or unity, his eyes were counting divisions. He knows exactly where his tanks are. He knows exactly how far they can roll before we can stop them. And he knows we will not stop them while the war against Japan still needs Russian help. A gust of wind rattles the palms along the terrace edge. Churchill shivers, pulls his jacket tighter. I have tried to believe in the future we are building here. I have tried to trust that Stalin's promises are more than ink on paper. But trust is a luxury we can no longer afford. He pauses, then speaks almost to himself. There will come a day soon when the peoples of the West must be told the truth. Not the victory parades, not the handshakes. The truth that an iron curtain has descended across Europe, from Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic. Eden looks startled. You'll say that publicly? When the moment is right, Churchill replies. Not here. Not now, but soon. The next morning, February 12th, the conference ends. The final protocol is signed in the White Hall. Maps are rolled up. Documents are sealed. Photographs are taken, 3 leaders seated together, smiling for the cameras. Churchill's smile is tight, almost grim. Roosevelt looks exhausted. Stalin's face is unreadable. The farewell is brief. Handshakes. A few final toasts. Stalin walks Churchill to the car. Until Berlin, Comrade Churchill, he says. Until Berlin, Marshal, Churchill answers. Neither man mentions peace. The Humber pulls away down the winding coastal road. Churchill sits in silence, watching the palace shrink in the rear window. The sea glitters coldly under a pale February sun. He feels the weight of what has been agreed and what has been left unsaid settling on his shoulders like wet snow. As the car climbs into the hills, he turns to his private secretary, Brendan Bracken, who's ridden ahead to meet them. Make sure my diary is clear for the first week of March, Churchill says quietly. I need to go to America. Bracken raises an eyebrow. Official visit? No, Churchill says. A private one? I have something to say, and I intend to say it plainly. The car rounds a bend and Levadia Palace disappears from view. Behind them, the future of half a continent is already being reshaped in silence, under the watchful eyes of men in greatcoats, carrying submachine guns. Churchill closes his eyes for a moment, the taste of champagne still on his tongue, the phrase Iron Curtain now fully formed in his mind. He knows it will shock many. He knows it will anger some. He also knows it is the truth, and the truth, however bitter, must be spoken before the shadow becomes permanent. The voyage home and the gathering storm. March 4th, 1945. 11:20 p.m. Aboard the Queen Mary, somewhere in the North Atlantic. The great liner slices through heavy seas under blackout conditions. Her superstructure painted in wartime dazzle camouflage. Every porthole sealed tight against prying U-boat periscopes. The ship rolls steadily in 20-foot swells. Water thunders against the hull like distant artillery. Inside Churchill's suite on the main deck formerly. The royal apartments. The air is warm, close, scented with cigar smoke. old leather, and the faint metallic temps of the ship's ventilation. Churchill sits at the broad writing desk in shirt sleeves and braces, the reading lamp casting a hard pool of light across scattered foolscap pages. His fountain pen moves in short, forceful strokes. A half-empty tumbler of whiskey stands beside an overflowing ashtray. The only sound is the creak of the ship's timbers, the muffled throb of engines far below, and the scratch of nib on paper. He has been writing for hours. The phrase has taken root now, growing sharper with every Atlantic mile. From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. He reads the sentence aloud, testing its weight. It lands like a hammer on anvil cold. Final, unmistakable. Behind him, on the settee, his daughter, Seda, recently demobilized from the WAAF, sits, curled in an armchair, a blanket over her knees. She has come along partly as companion, partly to keep an eye on the man who refuses to rest. She watches her father's broad back, the way his shoulders hunch forward as though bearing an invisible burden. "Father," she says quietly, "you'll frighten them." Churchill does not turn. "Good," he replies. "They should be frightened. Complacency is the luxury of the vanquished. We are not yet victorious, not. Truly, we have beaten one tyrant only to watch another rise in his place." He sets the pen down, swivels the chair to face her. His face in the lamplight is lined, exhausted, yet the eyes burn with that familiar, unyielding fire. "I have seen maps redrawn in smoke-filled rooms. I have heard promises made over champagne, and I have watched the Red Army's shadow lengthen across every liberated mile. If we do not speak now plainly, publicly the curtain will not merely descend, it will be bolted shut." Sarah nods slowly. She has heard the stories from Yalta, pieced together from his late-night mutterings and Eden's grim dispatches. She knows the cost of silence. She also knows the cost of speaking too soon. The Queen Mary docks in New York Harbor on March 8th. Churchill travels by train to Washington, then on to Florida for a brief rest at the Miami home of his old friend Consuelo Vanderbilt Bolson. But rest is fleeting. Cables, arrivée, daily Soviet troops, consolidating in Romania, arresting non-communist leaders, Bulgaria's opposition silenced. Polish arrests, mounting. Each report tightens the knot in his chest. By early March, he is back in Washington, guest of the president at the White House. Roosevelt is visibly frailer now. His hands shake more noticeably, his voice thinner. They talk late into the night in the Oval Study. Churchill presses the point. Stalin cannot be trusted to honor the Yalta agreements. Roosevelt listens, nods wearily, promises to raise the matter again with Stalin. But the president's mind is already turning. Toward the Pacific, toward the atomic project, toward the final push against Japan. Europe feels distant, almost settled. Churchill leaves Washington on March 12th, bound for Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri. The invitation had come months earlier, a small honorary degrees ceremony. Now it has become something far larger. He is accepted, knowing the college's modest stage will carry his words farther than any grand hall in London or Washington. March 5th, 1946, 3:30 p.m. The gymnasium of Westminster College, Fulton, Missouri. The room is packed students, faculty, local dignitaries, a scattering of press. The air smells of polished wood, fresh coffee, and the nervous anticipation of history about to be spoken. Truman has come personally to introduce his wartime counterpart. The two men sit side by side on the platform. Truman relaxed and genial, Churchill grave beneath his black hat. At 3:49 p.m., Churchill rises. The room falls silent. He adjusts his notes, clears his throat, and begins in that familiar, rolling cadence. "Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen," he speaks for nearly an hour. He praises the Anglo-American alliance, warns of the Soviet shadow lengthening across Europe, recounts the betrayals already visible in Poland and the Balkans. Then come the words the world will never forget. From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that line lie all the capitals of the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe. Warsaw, Berlin, Prague, Vienna, Budapest, Belgrade, Bucharest, and Sofia. All these famous cities and the populations around them lie in what I must call the Soviet sphere, and all are subject in one form or another, not only to Soviets' influence but to a very high and, in many cases, increasing measure of control from Moscow. A ripple moves through the audience shunk. Murmurs. A few sharp intakes of breath. Churchill presses on, calm/inexorable. This is certainly not the liberated Europe we fought to build up. Nor is it one which contains the essentials of permanent peace. He concludes with a call to strength Anglo-American unity, military preparedness, moral clarity. Then he sits. The applause is warm but uneven. Some clapped vigorously. Others sit stunned, hands folded. Outside, as the winter sun sinks behind the bare Missouri hills, reporters scramble for telephones. The phrase Iron Curtain is already racing along wire services to every capital in the world. In London, newspapers prepare extra editions. In Moscow, translators work through the night. In the White House, Roosevelt's successor, now President Truman, reads the transcript with a tight smile. He had known the speech would be blunt. He had not known it would be thunder. Churchill steps into the waiting car. Truman claps him on the shoulder. "You've said what need a saying, Winston." Churchill nods once. Now we shall see who listens. The car pulls away down the quiet streets of Fulton. Behind it, the shadow of the coming Cold War has just been given a name and a voice. Echoes across the divide. March 5th, 1946. 7:15 p.m. The Westminster College Gymnasium, Fulton, Missouri. The last echoes of applause have faded, leaving a charged hush in the high-ceilinged room. Folding chairs scrape against the hardwood floor as people rise slowly, some still stunned, others already reaching for coats and hats. Overhead lights buzz faintly. The smell of brewed coffee lingers from the reception urns, now cooling. Outside, a light Missouri snow has begun to fall soft, silent flakes drifting past the tall windows like ash from a distant fire. Churchill remains seated on the platform for a moment longer, hands resting on the arms of his chair, staring straight ahead as though still addressing an invisible assembly. President Truman stands beside him, clapping him once more on the back with that easy Midwestern warmth. "You've given them something to chew on, Winston. They'll be talking about this for years." Churchill manages a small, tight smile. "I hope they do more than talk, Harry." Reporters surge forward as the two men descend the steps. Flashbulbs pop in rapid succession, bleaching the scene white for split seconds. Questions fly like shrapnel. "Mr. Churchill, are you calling for war with the Soviet Union? Do you believe the United Nations can prevent this division? Is this the end of the Grand Alliance?" Churchill pauses at the foot of the platform. His voice, when it comes, is measured, almost weary. "I have not spoken of war. I have spoken of vigilance. Peace is not won by wishing for it. It is preserved by strength, moral strength, military strength, and the unyielding resolve to defend freedom wherever it is threatened." He moves on without further comment, Truman steering him through the crowd toward the side exit. Outside, black sedans wait with engines running, exhaust curling into the snowy air. Secret Service men form a loose cordon. Churchill climbs into the lead car. Truman follows. As the convoy pulls away down the quiet streets, the former Prime Minister gazes out at the passing houses' simple clapboard homes, with porch lights glowing like small beacons in the dusk. Inside the car, the silence is heavy. Truman breaks it first. "The papers will call it alarmist. Some will call it warmongering." "Let 'em," Churchill replies quietly. "Better alarmist today than enslaved tomorrow." The train carrying Churchill east departs Fulton shortly after midnight. He retires to his private compartment, the click-clack of wheels on rail, a steady metronome beneath his thoughts. A single reading lamp burns. He opens a fresh pad of foolscap and begins drafting cables 1 to Whately in London, 1 to Eden. Brief summaries of the speech and its immediate reception. Then he sits back, cigar unlit between his fingers, and allows himself a rare moment of reflection. He thinks of the faces in the gymnasium. Young students with futures still unwritten. Older men and women who remember the cost of 2 world wars. He thinks of the millions behind the curtain, already descending poles vanishing into NKVD cellars. Czechs watching their democracy dismantled piece by piece. Hungarians hearing the first whispers of purges to come. He thinks of Stalin, somewhere in the Kremlin, reading the wire service reports with that same impassive mask, calculating how far the West will bend before it breaks. By dawn, the train is rolling through the flat, snow-dusted plains of Illinois. Churchill stands at the window in dressing gown and slippers, watching the pale light spread across endless fields. A farmer in a distant barn pauses to watch the train pass, raising a hand in salute. Churchill raises his own. In return, a small, private gesture of recognition between two men who have both known what it means to defend what is theirs. The news breaks worldwide that morning. In London, the Times runs a restrained front-page headline. Mr. Churchill warns of Soviet Iron Curtain. In Paris, Le Monde calls it a grave alarm. From across the Atlantic. In Moscow, Pravda waits a day before responding, then unleashes a torrent of vitriol. Churchill's speech a call to new war. The warmonger speaks again. In the House of Commons, Clement Attlee's Labour government issues a cautious statement. His Majesty's government continues to work for cooperation with our Soviet allies. Privately, Foreign Office cables fly back and forth. Eden, still smarting from Yalta's compromises. Cables. Chew. You've said what many of us have thought but dared not voice. God grant the world listens. Churchill arrives back in England on March 20th, aboard the Queen Elizabeth. Southampton docks are quiet, no? Cheering crowds this time. Only a handful of officials and a cold March wind off the Solent. He steps ashore, Hamburg firmly in place, Kane tapping the gangway. A waiting Rolls-Royce carries him to London. Along the way, he reads the accumulating press clippings. Some praise his courage. Others accuse him of sabotage, of poisoning the peace so hard. At Chartwell that evening, he walks to the gardens alone. The snow has melted. The first crocuses are pushing through damp earth. He stops beside the ornamental lake, watching ripples spread from a dropped pebble. The water is black, reflecting a sky the color of gun. He speaks aloud, though no one is near enough to hear. We have drawn the line. Now we must hold it. In the months that follow, the phrase, Iron Curtain, enters the language first as controversy, then as accepted fact. NATO takes shape. The Berlin airlift begins. Proxy wars flare in distant places. The Cold War, once a shadow, becomes architecture: concrete walls, barbed wire, watchtowers, and the silent menace of mutually assured destruction. Yet on that March day in Fulton, it was still only words spoken by an aging statesman who refused to let hope blind him to reality. Words that would echo down decades, reminding the free world that peace is not a gift, but a vigil. And somewhere, in the lengthening twilight of his life, Winston Churchill knew he had done what duty demanded. He had named the danger before it swallowed the light entirely.